Hey folks, David Stewart here. Let's read some more YouTube comments. I did this a little bit before Christmas because I've had so many comments on the Last Jedi videos. It's really hard to go through and type them all out. And a lot of them are similar, so if I answered them this way, I might be touching on one of your comments or one of your questions. So it's a little more efficient and it's kind of more fun, a little bit different kind of format. I might do this going forward, like the week in comments, just answer a bunch of comments in a video every week. Because I did kind of enjoy this. So today I'm going to be doing the story analysis I did of Last Jedi as well as my nihilism video. Last time I did Rot at the Core of New Star Wars and my original consumer video. The majority of comments are on these last two videos, so this one may end up being two parts as well. So let's look at the nihilism one first. Wow, I really learned a lot. I'm just going to do top comments. So if you've got your comment voted up, you're probably going to hear it read. Please keep making videos like this in philosophy. I really enjoy this commentary. So I've done a lot of stuff like this as well. You can check the back catalog, and I'll probably continue to do it because it's very intellectually stimulating for me. So Rants and Rambles, he's a constant commenter, and I appreciate him. I was actually about to ask you about the subjective art argument. It's always irritating because I'm like, why are you even here on a review then? Is ketchup milk not gross because one guy out there likes it? So this is a good point. You may hear this a lot, that like art experiences are subjective, that liking or disliking art is always a subjective experience. And you actually know that's false because art exists. It's kind of like language. It's kind of like someone saying language has no meaning. You know that art has intent and has effects and is not completely subjective because artists make art, and there's good artists that are able to communicate things well. Art has an effect on you. Lots of people may like a given piece of art because they find it attractive or effective. That kind of means it's not subjective. Subjective experiences would be like, I like blue over green, right? It's like, I see the color blue, I like it. I see the color green, I don't like it. That's really subjective. The idea that there's a skill behind filmmaking suggests that it's not a subjective experience. There's a skill behind music. It's not a subjective experience. You have a thing called music theory. It's because music's not a subjective experience. Consonance and dissonance are not subjective experiences. How you like those in particular contexts, that can vary a lot by person to person, or how much dissonance you like to hear, or how much consonance you find tolerable. But the effect of them doesn't change that much. Dissonance is the tension. It's not mathematical relationships between pitches. Consonance is mathematical closeness, and that's sort of a release or a rest point, and that's going to be pretty much a universal experience for every person. How you build on that and construct a piece of art and who it affects differently, those things can vary, but the idea that art is subjective is nonsense, because otherwise you wouldn't have art. It's an argument against communication. It's one of those arguments against kind of like language. So there you go. Let's see here. The Lost Jedi is like a modern painting. It's a total declaration of war against God's creation. I would not agree that a modern painting is like that. So this is like the difference between, say, an inversion. But I used the word Satanism, and I kind of regret using that because people started thinking of Luciferian like Satanism, or whatever, however they define Satanism. I just meant like an inversion of standards. An inversion of standards is different from applying no standards. And so a lot of modern art is either trying to invert standards or applying no standards. And I think sometimes it's applying no standards, which is different from having like a war against God or something like that. It's really trying to make all meaning aesthetically irrelevant. Like meaning is subjective. That's really how I view like postmodernism and a lot of modern art, postmodern art, which has actually been a movement that's going on for quite some time. The first movie portrayed the Jedi as being pretty much like the Knights of Christendom, a loosely organized band of warriors who went about rescuing damsels in distress and recovering stolen lunch money. I don't think the first movie actually portrayed much about the Jedi at all, other than like they were all hunted down by Darth Vader. So I don't know about that. And in ESB Empire Strikes Back, the Jedi are transformed into Zen Buddhists, kind of, sort of, yeah. There's definitely like a lot of Eastern philosophy there. I don't think it's a bad thing. In the Phantom movie, the Jedi become essentially a bunch of bureaucrats running parallel to the government of the Republic. Then in The Force Awakens, the entire Jedi Code is undermined. Now in Lost Jedi, it is flipped on its head. It's like that kid on the beach who builds an amazing sandcastle just so he can enjoy destroying it. Yeah, it's kind of kind of tearing down of what was built. The story of the Jedi in the prequel trilogy is really about their hubris. It's really a story of hubris, pride, and pride goeth before the fall. So the Jedi have pride in their ability to sort of protect the Republic and manage this complex political situation, and what they end up doing is essentially doing the bidding of the Sith, and contributing to the downfall of the Republic by participating in a war. And then finally it comes to a head at the end of the third episode, where Mace Windu goes to kill Palpatine, and rather than having him stand trial or something, he says it's too dangerous to be left alive, we have to kill him. And at that point, you have Anakin realize that the Jedi are now subjugating their means to an end that they want, and that's a betrayal of their ideals. And I talked about this relationship between deontology and consequentialism. So now the Jedi are looking at this from a consequentialist perspective of like, we should do this thing that we normally wouldn't do because of the risks involved, because it creates an outcome that we really need. And at that point, he sees the Jedi as having fallen from their own standards, and that allows him to then fully embrace the dark side and say, well, if the Jedi view consequentialism as good, then I should fully embrace that and wipe the evil Jedi out and create peace. And in the original trilogy, there's always this motivation of Darth Vader. He wants peace. He keeps wanting organization. He doesn't want conflict, but his way of accomplishing the conflict is to crush the rebellion and eliminate dissent. And you get the seeds of that in the prequel trilogy as well, where he's like, they should be made to agree, which is a very juvenile thing to say, but it was George Lucas kind of foreshadowing where that character was going to go in the next movie. In episode 3, he was going to go down this path of I have to embrace the dark side to save my wife, to save the Republic and prevent the Jedi from destroying it and destroying democracy by killing the Chancellor. And then, of course, the Chancellor becomes the Empire. He's the one who ends up destroying it. But by that time, he's already kind of embraced this sort of loose interpretation of consequentialism. So it's kind of interesting. Let's keep going. As many put the rhetoric from the left in Hollywood as more as repentance or indulgence for their sins. It's meant more as repentance or indulgence from their sins. So, yeah, when you hear people from Hollywood, I'm hoping I'm not removing the context of this comment, but when you hear people from Hollywood and they advocate for feminism, they're like, I'm a feminist, women are discriminated against, racism, blah, 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 blah. What they're really doing is they're sort of virtue signaling. People talk about virtue signaling. You're trying to say that I'm virtuous inside my heart. Why do they feel the need to do that? Well, they feel the need to do that because they're guilty of some transgression. That's why you see so many people like Joss Whedon who proclaim that they're feminists, and then it turns out that they pressure teenagers into having sex with them while they cheat on their wives, right? Like it's like the millennial version of the anti-gay Republican getting caught with a transgender prostitute or something. And actually, I think somebody said that at one point. So I'm probably robbing a quote from someone. If you know who said that recently, just leave the comment of who actually said that. But it's a great analogy. It's like this. You feel the need to proclaim this because you yourself are indulging in that sin. And so if you say that we need to, fix everything for women, for discriminated women, then that absolves you of having directly participated in the oppression of young women in this big Hollywood machine. So that's interesting. That's kind of my take on that comment. That requires humanity was savage. Great arguments and well spoken. Subba lubba dub dub. I'm imagining Rick's voice. Excuse me. Basically, Star Wars and Hollywood have been taken over by Rick Sanchez. Oh, speaking of Rick Sanchez. Oh yeah, Morty. You want to see Luke Skywalker do some cool shit? You like him? You think he's your childhood hero, Morty? You want to see Luke Skywalker defeat evil and save the day? Well, guess what, Morty? Good and evil are meaningless constructs. It's all a joke. Luke Skywalker is a joke, Morty. Just like Jesus and Buddha and Santa Claus and the notion of anything you ever do being right. This isn't special. Your love of Star Wars isn't special. There are infinite versions happening right now. Blah, blah, blah. I hate anything healthy that doesn't need my self-loathing overthinking to be okay with itself. Postmodernists in a nutshell. Now, well, maybe I'll talk about Rick and Morty on a different video, but the beauty of Rick Sanchez is that he proclaims that he's like some sort of ultra-cynic nihilist, and then he does things that don't agree with that, indicating that he really wishes he was and kind of isn't. But maybe we'll explore that in another video. And hopefully you enjoyed my little impression there. Outstanding cultural analysis. I love when people kiss my ass. Western civilization is in serious trouble. Yeah, it is. What some people say, though, the problem is the solution. Eventually, if a collapse happens, then that removes all the negative incentives, and then things can recover. If you have people who've migrated in that aren't culturally compatible, they go back home because they're not receiving any more government benefits. There's a whole, there's definitely hope of a possible recovery even after a collapse. But it's not too late, right? We can always do something about that in the here and now if we don't want to suffer that discomfort. Not supporting products you don't approve of looks like a proper way of going about it. Milton Friedman used to say that in a free market, every cent is a vote, and consumers determine who is successful by buying from the best. For that reason, I chose not to see this movie in theaters. I chose to see it because, and this was a debate, do I need to provide consumer information in a review, or do I need to vote with my dollar? And by providing this consumer information review, I may have prevented more people from voting with their dollar and supporting it. So the net benefit might have been in my favor. Let me keep reading. As for the postmodernist nihilist argument, I'd say it's fairly accurate, except that it stops at the accidental part of the phenomenon. If you look a bit deeper into the dynamics of the Cold War, the developments in European academy in the last century, particularly concerning the School of Frankfurt and the French postmodernists, you'll find that there's a body of work dating almost 100 years back, connected with even older literature explicitly aimed at weaponizing culture for political goals. It spilled over America during the 30s and is at the core of the current state of academia. I think that's actually accurate. As far as its nihilist influence, when in the U.S., I'd recommend to read on the works of one Richard Rorty, who I haven't read. At the heart of it lies not only denial of morality, but of reality itself, and a radical affirmation of subjectivity and voluntarism. Not all of it is a byproduct of societal changes. There's also a lot of deliberate efforts factoring in to produce this result. So this thing, it's like a denial of morality, but of reality itself, and a radical affirmation of subjectivity and voluntarism. That is my understanding of postmodernism. As I studied this both from a literary perspective and a philosophical perspective years ago now, 15 years ago. And the idea is that, anything that any view you have is merely an interpretation of things. And we know that that's not true. I've done the light bulb, if you turn on a light, the light turns on because, reality acts in the way that science predicts it'll act. But part of the postmodern idea is that, all of our views of morality, everything's subjective. And when you come at it from that perspective, everything is not just subjective, but equal and equally irrelevant, equally meaningless. Then there's no particular reason to have any kind of moral code except for aesthetic reasons. And so what you tend to get with postmodernism is you have moral arguments, or you have morality being reduced to the level of aesthetics. And you get this sometimes with cultural relativism in anthropology, and sometimes in ethics there's a discussion of, things which are relative versus hard or soft universalism. And I don't know, I can make some content talking about those things at some point. But when you reduce morality to the level of aesthetics, that just means it's a system that's designed to please or not please an audience or a particular group of people. That's kind of the way that their take on aesthetics would be. I think aesthetics can support morality and vice versa. So when you have that, then whatever way that you choose to express morality, it's merely a qualification of what aesthetics you want to kind of promote. And once you get to that point, then you can really just not only remake morality, but kind of remake man, because man's morality is impressed upon him through some aesthetic, some means of communicating aesthetics. And this was really, really important to the communists in the 20th century and before, really going back to Marx. The idea that you could make a man into a communist. You could rewrite the nature of mankind to make him a communist. And so that's why you had stuff like the Gulag re-education camps. You had this stuff where you're going to take a person with one mindset and you're going to overwrite them with another mindset to produce this aesthetic outcome you want, called equality or communism. That's really at the heart, in a lot of ways, at the heart of what communists did in the 20th century that killed so many people. And in a sense, they're okay killing those people because, if they fail to be rewritten into the new communist mold, then they'll prevent communism from having its full benefits. And so the actions are justified. And it's a consequentialist argument. And I think, I'm a deontologist. I think you should reject consequentialist arguments, particularly if a consequentialist argument is making valuations that are like advocating for murder or rape or something like that, right? Things that pretty much universally are immoral. And most people are going to have a hard time saying otherwise without then evoking some sort of universal morality to try to make their point. Versus, you can have consequentialist stuff when you're talking about, like, I don't know, tax law or something, and that kind of presupposes that taxes are moral, but, do we do the tax law this way or do it that way? And you're kind of looking at pros and cons, like, what's the consequence going to be? That's important. Like, you don't want to avoid all consequences. But the idea that you can have some sort of beneficial end that will negate or justify very, very bad moral things, that's kind of the dark side of the force right there. Let's move on, because there's so much to talk about with that. Deconstruction works better from an unrelated space opera series commenting on Star Wars. They had one with Tim Allen. It's kind of like a Star Trek. Oh, no, I mean, like Spaceballs is a spoof. That's an example of a deconstruction. Sorry, I was thinking of the Star Trek spoof with Alan Rickman and Tim Allen, which was pretty funny. Doing it from within Star Wars is like Cortez burning his ships while he's at sea. Yeah. So deconstruction, I think, is really valuable. I will do another video specifically on deconstruction. Deconstruction, I think, can point out a lot of things that are important to discuss. And through inversion of what you see, or making fun of what you see, or satirizing it, you can shed light on problems that are there. And I think Spaceballs is a really funny movie, and it's a deconstruction of Star Wars. You have the guys pulling out their Schwartz, and their lightsaber comes out, and it's clearly phallic, and that's very funny, but it also is kind of making a commentary on the sword itself as sort of a hyper-masculine phallic object. Which leads us to wonder why Rey is using a lightsaber. But anyway, that by itself is a deconstruction. And that's not always bad. Like, that can be funny, or it can be good, or it can be insightful, or it can be wrong. And I think with The Last Jedi, what you have is you have deconstruction within the main series, which is probably not appropriate. And when I talk about deconstruction in the other video, I'll probably point out a video game that you may not have played, but I do recommend you play. It's called Spec Ops: The Line. And it's a modern military shooter, sort of. And it's a deconstruction of the modern military shooter genre, where very quickly in it you're killing civilians and killing Americans because of an illusion of choice that the video game developers were able to create within the game. And it keeps sort of questioning not only the nature of these modern military shooters as a genre, but also why people are playing them and what they're trying to get out of them. And anyway, it's a very, very interesting game. I do recommend it. It is a deconstruction. However, if that had come out not called Spec Ops: The Line, but called Call of Duty Modern Warfare Part 2 or something, Part 3, if it had come out as a Call of Duty game, it would have created a massive amount of backlash and controversy from the Call of Duty fans, because they don't want to pick up a Call of Duty game and have the Call of Duty game recuse them for, or accuse them of being a bad guy for playing a Call of Duty game, or say that Call of Duty is stupid while they're playing a Call of Duty game. They don't want that. The audiences don't want that. And because you're killing Americans in Spec Ops: The Line, you probably would have had like congressmen get on it. It's like, here you have this Call of Duty game that's telling kids to kill Americans, and it would have been a big deal. But because it was outside of one of those official, like Medal of Honor, or now there's Battlefield, Call of Duty, because it was outside of those main those main games, it was able to create a deconstruction of the genre without creating all the negatives. It can be viewed as just like a way to make you think about those games and sort of the place that you put on them and how they maybe affect kids, and not have to sit there and think about how bad you are for playing them. You just don't have that same kind of effect. So that's a really good example. Let's read a couple more. Nihilism is incredibly dangerous, and to have the cultural might of Star Wars associated with it terrifies me. Yeah, that's the thing. Is like you're broadcasting these messages to a lot of people. A lot of people. So, it's made a lot of money already. So that means a lot of people went out and watched the movie to then get a message that all your attempts to overcome evil are meaningless, and those who with virtue will inevitably end up as bitter old men. There you go. You're like a Stephen Molyneux without the rants and read too much into everything nonsense and the loner arrogance that comes with it. Guess I found a new channel to binge watch. Thank you. I like Stephen Molyneux. He did a thing with like Magic is Madness a while back that I'm like, I think you're just way not thinking how fantasy works. And I don't think he writes fantasy, and I do. Magic systems to me are a little bit different. I'll talk about it in a video called Magic Systems. Or Magic fantasy does not excuse unreality. I think the Disney suits, Rian Johnson or J.J. Abrams, do not understand what Lucas was trying to say in his films. Not really. That's kind of how I feel. I feel they either don't know it. So Rian Johnson, this film, I think he either doesn't understand what Lucas was trying to communicate, or he understands and hates it. And both of those I don't like. That's how I feel about it. I think it's probably more likely he understands it and wants to deconstruct it. Because that's the effect. I don't know what's going on in his head, but I can look at what he did. And what he did was turn all the expectations on his head and subvert everything that was sort of had a message in Star Wars. Even when they say you shouldn't apply standards, in that very moment they're applying a standard to what is appropriate behavior. There you go. The standard is not to apply standards. Once again, their logic eats itself. There you go. You can't evoke, like you can't argue against morality without evoking some kind of morality. Same thing with this comment. The problem I've always had with the idea that nothing is absolute is that is an absolute. It's another one of these self-defeating premises. And I might want to start collecting these and like making some content on them because I think they're fun. Let's find one that's got a lot of upvotes. Here we go. They killed Luke Skywalker and Yoda laughed at him. In one scene, it broke my heart and it was just terrible. It was too loud and ruined the whole mythology. Yeah. It's like Yoda's ghost comes up to laugh at Luke. It's like that was a little bit of like a big F you to the fans. Okay, let's move on to the next one because I don't want to spend all day on this next one. All right, so this one's my full story analysis. Lots of comments, way too many comments for me to ever get through, and I'm really sorry if I have to skip comments or whatever. It's really hard to get to them all. It seems like this movie is designed to kill all fan theories and any enthusiasm for the saga. Maybe they'll think it's easier to sell shittier stories to casual fans who haven't given it much thought. So I think they are trying to sell stories to more casual fans. I think that's the goal, because if you only are trying to sell stories to like the hardcore fan base, that is smaller than the casual fans. You want to sell to the casual fans. And here's what I think their business strategy is. And this is where I think Rey comes from. Because Rey is a female. And so you look at it from a marketing perspective. Okay, we have Star Wars. All the Star Wars fans are going to come see the new Star Wars movie. That's a given. So you have kind of like a guaranteed return with a big group of people. It's like one of the most popular IPs that exists. So we have that. How do we get more people into Star Wars? Well, the Star Wars fan base is heavily male. So can we put a female lead in, and that might get more women interested? Like, okay, we put in a female lead. It's like, okay, well, the people who are going to see the new Star Wars may not have seen the original one, so we need to make it really a lot like the original one to get. And you can see how that kind of goes down the list, to where you're kind of hitting these marketing check boxes. You're like, okay, maybe we'll put a black actor in because this audience is heavily white. So you have a guaranteed heavily white audience. Maybe we bring in some more minorities or something like that. And actually, I think the Star Wars audience is pretty diverse in my experience. I haven't met too many people that thought like Star Wars was like some kind of whitewashed, awful thing, while they were in fact a minority. I always felt like Star Wars was kind of for everyone. It had a lot of representation, kind of like Star Trek. And maybe I'll make this point here. Star Trek and Star Wars, to a little bit lesser extent, both portrayed a future in which people were respected as individuals, not judged on their group. And Star Trek sometimes faltered with this. This was Gene Roddenberry's vision of Star Trek. This was the fruits of sort of civil rights, or what at the time might have been thought of as like feminism and progressivism and anti-racism and that kind of stuff. Is that people were viewed as individuals and judged as individuals, and they weren't prejudged based on their group membership. Well, that's kind of been turned on its head the last decade, where now you have people advocating that everyone should be prejudged based on their group. It's the opposite of that vision, and so the vision of the end result being people like each other as human beings. People are competent. There's competent females in Star Trek. There's competent females in Star Wars. The original Princess Leia, she's a really kick-ass female protagonist. Very, very, she'd fit right at home in a modern young adult sort of story. But that's kind of been turned on its head to where the group membership is what matters, and minority memberships are prioritized above majority memberships or typical those who have held power. Rather than it being your group membership doesn't matter and therefore everyone can be equal, it's your group membership now does matter. And I don't know, I guess equality is either a farce, or equality means just an inversion of old power structures. So if white men were in power before, what needs to happen is for non-white people to be in power. Like, that has to happen. It's like, why does that have to happen? Why can't it just be moving to a more egalitarian society? And it's kind of a weird, like, short circuit, and I'm not quite sure how it happened, and I'll probably give it some more thought. But I think, I think it's advantageous for a lot of people to claim group membership and declare that group membership is beneficial when they're a member of a group that they view as being able to get something from being a part of a group. Okay, I don't know if they're trying to kill all enthusiasm for the saga. I think what Rian Johnson wanted to do was deconstruct it to like surprise people maybe, but didn't realize that, or just didn't have any value for what was there, and kind of wanted to show that there was no value there. And I think modern audiences don't even think that much about it. I think they just are more excited by being surprised than stimulated. That's kind of how I view about it. That's going to be the main argument for this new Star Wars movie. If you talk to anyone, they're like, well, it was like, I loved the ships and this explosion. They're never going to talk about, oh, I loved watching my childhood hero, Luke Skywalker, drink green milk from some sea monster. Right. Let's move on. Did Rian Johnson ever see any of the previous Star Wars movies? I think he did, based on what we saw, because it was a deconstruction. What a terrible movie. Rian Johnson is a feminist. Okay, how many times throughout the movie do you have to show us that? Did you need to turn Luke Skywalker into a weak, bitter old man who at one point had his mouth on a monster's nipple? He didn't have his mouth on the nipple. He milked it with his hand, with milk dribbling down his disheveled beard. That aside, how many political statements can you try and fit into this one? Rose hating the evil casino and weapons dealers, the releasing of the racehorses due to animal cruelty, but not the children. He saves the children, but not the British children. You forget people love Star Wars because it was a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Princess Leia flying around like Superman, and Rey is magically the most powerful Jedi ever with no Force background. Again, feminist views not needed. Shame on you, Disney. Now, actually, this will tie into something I just said. So sometimes I think people are giving the feminist line a little too much credit. Because this isn't like a really good expression of feminist ideals. We don't see competent female characters that are equal to their male counterparts. Rey is not equal to Luke because Rey has no struggles. She's instantly good at whatever she's doing. Even when she comes and meets the Last Jedi, she should hate him, and then she defeats him in a duel and has no respect for him. Learns nothing and goes on and is uber powerful without having to practice or be shown anything. So I don't think Rey is a good representation of like a feminist ideal of like female empowerment. She's powerful magically, not because of any virtue of her own, not because she worked hard or anything like that. So she's a bad role model in that sense. But more than that, you also have like Vice Admiral Purple Hair, Pink Hair, whoever she was. She's horribly incompetent. The females that are portrayed in The Last Jedi are all incompetent. And the fact that they're portrayed in power should matter less than the fact that they act horribly, right? So maybe there's like a feminist, maybe that's their idea of an expression of feminists, and they're nihilists. So they're not really looking at trying to portray women positively. They're just looking to show women having power over men, but then they use that power horribly. It's a really bizarre thing. I don't think they're doing, if the feminist themes are really like part of their priority and they're putting them in there, they seem to be doing a really bad job of it. Like it doesn't seem like a good sort of representation of any kind of feminist ideal. And this goes back to, what do you want to portray? Star Trek and Star Wars of the past portrayed an egalitarian sort of future with this advanced society, where women are not, they have no particular role impressed upon them by virtue of being women. They are capable of wielding power and exercising political power with competence, and are capable of virtue just like their male counterparts are. And you see that with both Star Trek and all 6 Star Wars movies. You have Queen Amidala, which people have informed me was supposed to be 13 in episode 1, which I guess I just forgot about that. So I was always like, it's a little weird that she likes this boy later on. So you always have a female character that's portrayed as competent, not just in power, but is able to execute the power competently. She's a competent senator. She's a competent queen. You know, she partakes in a lot of the action in episode 2. So those sorts of things. I'm talking about Padme. If we go back to Leia, Leia's competent. She's a military commander and is able to help the people who are underneath her. She's able to help destroy the Death Star. She helps with her own escape, and in fact, like executes her own escape in many regards. Is just as competent as Luke and Han, if not more so, in the first movie. But we don't have this inversion. We don't have an attempt to invert it and say, like, well, rather than her being just as competent as male counterparts, we're going to have her be more powerful and better. That to me is maybe a fruit of like this more later kind of intersectional feminism that we see. That's like, well, women are better than men. It's like, I don't think that, and I don't know too many other people who actually think that. It's more just, are you prejudging someone based on their group participation? And this sort of competition between intellectuals and groups. So that's kind of what we see. The older Star Trek stuff and Star Wars stuff, it showed women as equals to men. Now you see women put in a place where they are better than men, but that doesn't really sort of jive with the classical, sort of more classic feminist ideology, maybe the newer stuff. But even if it jives with the newer stuff, it's like, great, you put women in power and then they're incompetent in this movie. So it seems like a really bad iteration of either one of those. So I'm not quite sure what it is. I think it's mostly marketing. I think marketing is I think money is sort of the big drive behind it. And I think you're gonna pander to whoever is gonna give you the most money. And so if you want to get more female audience members, you're gonna have more kick-ass females. And that's kind of how it's probably going to be. So yeah, it's a bad iteration of even like intersectional feminism when you stop and think about it. This movie feels like Marvel superhero more than Star Wars. Yeah. But I kind of like Marvel movies. No true intense moments and tons of dumb one-liners. Worst of all, nothing makes common sense. I think the one-liners in the Marvel movies make more sense than the ones in Force Awakens. And again, it goes into expectations. A Marvel movie, you bring different expectations in with you. And it's established different expectations through all its different comics and movie iterations. I really got the feeling Disney was shoving the old fans out the door so they could sell stuff to less informed new fans with low expectations. I think they viewed the old fans as going to buy it no matter what. And then you want to add new fans to that. That's how you expand it. and they're going to do it with hitting whatever checkboxes they can. Unfortunately, they're not doing it with making good movies. And to me, maybe they probably know something about this, is that the newer kids don't care about good movies, like good stories, nearly as much as they care about being stimulated for 2 hours. And that's kind of what we got. We got a 2.5 hour hyper stimulation movie. Force Awakens was a 2 hour, roller coaster ride of stimulation rather than an emotional good story. Needless to say, I won't be watching episode 9, The First Mary Sue. I'll probably end up watching it because people want me to, not because I want to watch it. But obviously, we've had several Star Wars movies now, and whether or not you liked Rogue One, you have to kind of look at episode 7 and 8 as kind of not good. And based on those, how are you going to judge your spending of your dollar on the next movie? My recommendation would be you don't spend your dollar on it, right? I think Disney has proven that they're not up to the task of making good Star Wars movies. You can watch their Marvel movies, whatever. But don't watch the Star Wars movies. And even within that company, even though I shouldn't give them any money. Well, if you give them money to make the movies that you like, then they'll make those instead of the movies you don't like. Just a thought. This movie was just dreadful. I can only explain how bad it was in this context. If the New Testament of the Bible was the original trilogy and the Old Testament was the prequel trilogy, then this next chapter with Jesus returning only to find out that God actually raped his mom. So he contemplates killing the Pope in his sleep, but doesn't, and the Pope becomes satanic. So he goes off to some deserted island in the Pacific to die, and some random girl shows up to give him a piece of the original cross. Mary becomes Mary Poppins and flies around. Meanwhile, his remaining followers flee by boat and are chased by an even slower cruise ship, while some cardinals go to Monte Carlo for no particular reason. Yeah, that's funny. If the characters had acted like normal humans, the entire plot wouldn't have happened. Yeah. You have Finn and Rose hyperspace away from this fleet. Why didn't everyone just get on an escape pod or a little ship and hyperspace away in a different direction? They couldn't have followed all of them. But that would have made sense, and it would have saved everybody's lives. And then, Rian Johnson would have had to have thought of actual plot devices to follow that. Right? Like in Empire Strikes Back, the rebels escape from the Empire at the beginning of the movie. And then Vader has to concoct a plan to try to catch Luke Skywalker after that. So that's, you have a story that happens. To every Rian Johnson apologist who says that Star Wars The Last Jedi's poor rating comes from haters who can't let go of their childhood and can't deal with change, reality check. Imagine if Disney commissioned Rian Johnson to do a sequel to Da Vinci's painting The Last Supper. Then Rian Johnson took a can of spray paint, drew a big smiley face over the original canvas. Yeah. But it still needs the popularity of Da Vinci's original series to sell his new version. Yeah, it's true. There's an old... I'm going to read this last... This is probably going to be the last comment I read right here. Because this one's starting to get pretty long. And I appreciate you guys watching. Hopefully this has been somewhat entertaining. There's an old bit of advice for authors. Write what you know. For years now, it's been painfully apparent that none of the writers or creators or screenwriters or directors or producers or actors in Hollywood know what heroism actually is. Now think about this. The last generation of actors who participated in war probably participated in World War II. There's not that many actors who were in Vietnam that are still around and active. There's some, but there's not very many. I can't think of any off the top of my head. But Ronald Reagan was in World War II, and I think he actually did film stuff for the army. So there were people that were in the military in World War II and then were in entertainment, and that's not really been the case, and it's always been a really small percentage. So that's just something that comes to mind. There's just not that many actors who are veterans. There's some, but not that many. They simply don't get, as they never experienced in their lives and don't know anyone personally who has either. The entertainment industry in general is not a system that rewards heroic behavior. Otherwise, vermin like Harvey Weinstein would be the rare exception instead of the actual norm that they are. One last bit I'll interject. Being in the military doesn't necessarily make you a hero, but that's a place where you're put in mortal danger and where sometimes heroism can present itself. particularly on the individual level. Thus, they can't handle anything to do with actual heroism. At best, they can only portray heroes as the broken, dysfunctional, neurotic, craven things they see all around them, who are called heroes strictly for publicity purposes, and who are terrified of their lie being exposed. Hence, Hollywood's turning all the heroes of Battlestar Galactica into nihilistic assholes in their reimagined reboot of that series. I didn't really like the reboot of Battlestar Galactica, personally. Hence, Hollywood's turning the heroes of Star Wars into what we just saw on the screen with The Last Jedi. None of those screenwriters or directors could handle the Luke Skywalker that was courageous enough to have destroyed the Death Star, nor could they have handled the Luke Skywalker who was strong enough and dedicated enough to have defeated Darth Vader. Darth Vader in single combat and come within a hair's breadth of killing him. Nope, they couldn't deal with that. So they made that actual heroic character into this craven, neurotic, sniveling emo thing. It was so bad that even Mark Hamill has publicly declared how wrong it was, but went along with it due to all the money he was being paid and thereby demonstrating that there really aren't any heroes in Hollywood. And as far as I know, Mark Hamill actually signed on to these 3 movies before seeing scripts for them, and I think he signed on to them before he knew Lucas wasn't going to direct them. So they made the actual heroic... Yes, okay. If you look at the write-ups and statements made by the directors and producers of the new Star Wars films, it's all about how diversity and representation and women's empowerment, the full social justice warrior dogma, which is actually really poorly expressed, as I explained. That was far more important than telling good stories or having great acting up on the screen. This to the point that they've willfully ignored Carrie Fisher's doing all that back in the 70s with the first Star Wars film. I mentioned that. Her actions in her role, however, don't matter because now she didn't do all of that for today's social justice warrior ideology. She was portrayed as an equal. I'm interjecting this. She was portrayed as an equal, not as superior. But then you have a thing where you put women as superior and then they are incompetent and awful. So I don't know what Rian Johnson... Maybe he was deconstructing feminism secretly. She just gave that performance in that role because it was a good acting of a good character. Unless the whole point was to show how properly woke you are, then it just doesn't matter. So once again, the nihilism that infests these social justice types has destroyed yet another cultural icon. It seems that that's all they're able to do. Okay, so that's a great comment. I'm going to leave it there for today. My point with feminism is really just that, something's changed along the way to where if you portray a woman as equal to a man, that's somehow not what you have to do anymore. You have to show them being superior. But at the same time, the women in the movie were incompetent. So I don't know quite what they were trying to do, or if they just failed at their attempt to try to make women appear superior to men. Probably because they don't really believe in feminism. I don't know. Just my thought. You guys have a great day, and I'll talk to you next time. Leave your comments down below, and I'll get to the comments on the comments movies in another comment video. So have a great one. By the way, do try to join my mailing list if you want to sort of get in on the next fantasy book. It's called Needle Ash. I already have the first 2 books of it are up, and you can read those. The 3rd one will be up shortly. It'll be up for retail stuff, but if you're on my list, you're going to get all 3 for free. And that's how it's going to go. So if you're on my list right now, you're going to get all 3 for free, and I'll have another book for you for free as well if you join right now. So have a great one, and I'll see you next time.